واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقهوا قولي. الحمد لله رب العالمين، ثم الصلاة والسلام على سيدنا ونبينا وحبيب إله العالمين أبي القاسم محمد وعلى آله الطيبين الطاهرين المعصومين، واللعنة على أعدائهم أجمعين من الآن إلى قيام يوم الدين. أما بعد، فقد قال الله تعالى في محكم كتابه الحكيم: بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم: والذين إذا أنفقوا لم يسرف ولم يقتر وكان بين ذلك قواما. آمنا بالله، صدق الله العلي العظيم. Your second salawat for love of Muhammad wa Ali Muhammad. And your loudest salawat to hasten the master of our time, Sahibul Asri wa Zaman. Before we even get to our discussion, something that's worth sharing as well. There was an alim who in the Hawza would teach, and he would teach the highest level, Bahaf al-Kharij. And this Ayatollah, he would start his class in the same way every day until one day he changed it. And they said, we don't know why, but our teacher, he started the class by reciting the Masa'ib of Imam Hussain. He did it the first day. We didn't think anything of it. Then the second day, third day. And it happened now all of a sudden that every class he began by reciting some of the Musibat of Imam Hussain. Now you see, someone at that level of teaching, where the entire function of teaching is to attach purpose to action and have a reason behind everything, the student said, we saw our teacher change his habits and we don't understand why. So one day after class, they went to the teacher and they said, we want to understand, you changed something and you didn't explain to us why you changed that you started reciting the Masa'ib of Imam Hussain. So the teacher said, okay, I'll tell you. He says, some weeks ago, I had a dream. In my dream, it was the day of judgment, Roz Mahshar. And we were all standing in lines, and I found myself in the line of our sixth Imam Ja'far as-Sadiq alayhi salam. And I found all of the teachers and all of the scholars who teach fiqh and teach Islam were in this line. And this line was moving slowly because at the head of this line, the Imam, because we are known as Ja'fari, and he is the one who is responsible for teaching of fiqh, everyone who wanted to enter into heaven by the wasila of Imam Sadiq had to answer for every ruling that he gave. Why did he give the ruling? So Imam Sadiq was questioning each and every single person, and we were in the line to go to heaven, but it was a slow process. It says, as I was standing there in this line, I started to look around and I noticed to my right, there were people who were running into heaven. Running into heaven. And I thought to myself, how is this possible? I'm in the line of Imam Sadiq, but there are people going into heaven faster than me. So he says, eventually I found the ability and I asked one of the malaika that, what is this condition that I find over here? The malaika were nice to me because they saw I was in the line of Imam Sadiq. I'm going into heaven. I'm waiting for my turn. So I asked one of these angels, I said, can you explain to me why this line is moving so quick and my line is so slow? They said, this line that you see where people are running into heaven is the line of Imam al-Hussain alayhi salam. And he is letting enter anyone who has served in his majlis. That for them, Imam is standing at the front and waving them in that you have served in my majlis, you are entered into heaven by my wasila. And they were running into heaven. The Ayatollah says, when I woke up, I realized that though I am a teacher and that teacher has ahmiyat, the wasila of Imam Hussain is something that I don't want to miss. So I wanted to be amongst those who serve in the majlis and in the dhikr of Imam al-Hussain such that I would be entitled to his shifa'ah, that he would let me into heaven quickly. So I started the practice that whenever I have to teach a class, I ensure that I do the dhikr of Abu Abdullah, that maybe I can be included in his line. The significance of this story is to say that these recitations that we do, these participations that we do in the majlis of Imam al-Hussain are not to be taken lightly. It is a big opportunity. It is a very good opportunity. And each of us should participate however we can, whether that's by preparing the food, whether that's by reciting the marsiya, the noha, doing the matam, whatever we can do for the majlis, that we participate such that we have the entitlement of the shafa'ah of Imam al-Hussain. At this point, we'll tie into the rest of our discussion today. But if Allah has given the permission for an imam to do shifa'ah, to intercede on behalf of a person, let me ask you something. Do you think that that imam doesn't know who he's interceding for? Can you imagine that, for example, imam doesn't know me and he's going to do shifa'ah for me? Is that possible? No. Meaning that anyone who participates in this majlis, don't think of it that it's your choice. Meaning the imam either wants you to participate or he doesn't. If he wants you to participate, you will participate. Because the consequence of that participation is the shifa'ah of the imam. Is that the imam will intercede for you. He won't intercede for someone he doesn't know. He won't intercede for someone he didn't give permission to participate. He cannot be forced to give intercession to someone. The imam chooses to give intercession, which is why. It's not just that I want to do this. No, do I have the permission to do this? Do I have the ability to do this? The same way it's our perspective. On the day of Karbala, on the day of Ashura in Karbala, do you think the people were saying, Imam, do you need me? I'm doing you a favor here. I'm doing something for you. Or were the people saying, Ya Abu Abdullah, give us permission. Allow us the honor and the opportunity to be written with you. We don't do a favor to Imam Hussain when we participate in this majlis. The imam honors us and gives us an opportunity to participate in his majlis. Because the consequence of what he gives us in return is not done without his permission. When you attend a majlis, when you sit and listen to a majlis, when you cry tears for him, he knows each and every single person that it's not possible that he will help you on the day of judgment and not know who you are. It's not possible. This is why the da'ira of imamat, the position of imamat, the understanding of the authority of the imam is a very important concept to grasp. Very important. This is why when our sixth imam described Inna al-Husayn as-safinat misbah al-huda was safinat al-najah, that certainly this Hussein is the light of guidance and the ark of salvation. One of them replied, Yabna Rasulullah, awala kullukum safinatun najah? Aren't all of you an ark of salvation? Can't all of you get us into heaven? Imam Sadiq himself replies, he says, Bala, walakin safinatul Hussein awsa wa usra' minna. Yes, we are all the ark of salvation, but the ark of Hussein is wider and faster than us. That through him is the easiest wasila you have to enter into heaven. To take advantage of these opportunities. Don't take the majlis of Imam Hussain lightly, because it's not something that occurs in your life without permission. So therefore, these are opportunities that each of us should avail. That whenever we have the opportunity, that if there's something possible, we participate, however we can. Whether that's, again, picking up shoes, whether that's preparing the ground, whether that's preparing the food, whether that's reciting, whatever it is, that in some way we participate in the mention of Abu Abdullah such that he acknowledges us and gives us his shafa on the day of judgment. صلوا على محمد وآل محمد. صلوا على محمد. Back to our topic. The extra 5 minutes you gave me, I gave back to you. There you go. Our topic, we've been discussing the attributes of Ibadur Rahman, the servants of Allah. And yesterday we spent our time discussing the fourth attribute of the servants of Allah, which was they are the ones, Rabbana asrif anna adaba jahannama, inna adabaha kana gharama, innaha sa'at mustaqarra wa muqama. The dua of wanting to be separated from the fire of hell, and that a mu'min is one who does not have certainty and yaqeen that he will go to heaven. In this, I have another story for you. Are we okay? There's going to be 3 stories today. This is number 2. You okay? Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Never assume you're going to heaven. Always have that fear that Allah can punish you. And the example of this comes in one of the companions of our Holy Prophet by the name of Sa'ad ibn Ma'adh. Sa'ad ibn Ma'adh was one of the companions of our Holy Prophet who, when he died, they said, we saw something happen that we hadn't seen before. That the Prophet left his house and participated in carrying the janazah of Sa'ad. And as he walked in the janazah, it was as if he walked, in Arabic, ala atraf rijlayhi, as if he was on his tippy toes. On his toes he walked as he carried the janazah of Sa'ad. When he took Sa'ad to the grave, Rasulullah himself went into the grave and lowered the body of Sa'ad. Rasulullah performed all of the rites of Sa'ad himself with his own hands in such a way that he even was responsible for the burial of Sa'ad. And when he finished this process, he comes out and the mother of Sa'ad is present. And Sa'ad's mother says, "Oh Sa'ad, ubashiruka bil jannah." "Oh Sa'ad, I give you glad tidings of heaven." Subhanallah, you've had the Holy Prophet perform for you a service he did for no one else. In reply to the statement of the mother of Sa'ad, Rasulullah replies, he says, "Oh Sa'ad, la tahkumi ilallah." "Oh mother of Sa'ad, don't order and command Allah what to do. Right now your son Sa'ad is going through the punishment of the grave." She says, "Ya Rasulullah, we saw you do things for Sa'ad. We saw it for no one else. Why did you do them?" Rasulullah says, "Because I saw the malaika come down to participate in his janazah. I walked on my toes in carrying his grave because of the crowd of the malaika that were present. I stood on the edges of the group because of the crowd of the angels that came to bury him. I participated in his burial because of all of the angels who came down to bury him." Now, why did all the angels come down? Alama Majlisi narrates in one of his books, he gives an explanation. He says Sa'ad was one of the people who was excessive in the recitation of Surah Ikhlas. Now, excessive is something that has a negative connotation, but Sa'ad was someone who was constantly reciting Surah Ikhlas. Qul huwallahu ahad. And this surah was constantly on his tongue. And the consequence of his constant recitation of Surah Ikhlas, Allah sent down the malaika to participate in his janazah by the thousands. By the thousands they participate in his janazah. So she says, "Ya Rasulullah, why is he suffering the punishment of the grave? I saw something I've never seen before. You serve for my son like no one has served before. Yet now you're telling me that he's going through punishment of the grave?" And Rasulullah replies, he says, "Yes, because though your son had good character with the people, your son was well behaved in society and kind to the people, he was harsh with his family in the house. And the consequence of his harshness with his family in the house is the punishment of the grave he's undergoing now." Now this can open into an akhlaqi bahas, but retaining to our discussion yesterday of those who ask for forgiveness from the punishment of the fire of hell, never have the confidence to assume that there's no punishment. Listen, there are many points at which difficulty befalls us. The greatest and the worst of these difficulties is the punishment of the fire of hell. The worst of them. But some of our actions, the consequence of them, for example, we see in this life and we see the consequences and negative effects of those actions in this life. For example, qata'i raham. When you break relations with your family, you see the consequences, negative consequences in this life. Aqul walidain. When you abuse and are harsh with your parents, you see the consequence in this life. There are other examples of where the punishment comes to us in barzakh. that the event of barzakh becomes difficult for us because of actions that we performed in this life, as the example of Sa'ad ibn Ma'ad. That Sa'ad, though the malaika come to participate in his janazah, he has to go through the punishment of the grave. This is why it's very important to ensure that we perform the tasks that we can to protect us from all of these different aspects of punishment, and make dua that, oh Allah, protect us from any and all punishment that can befall us. Not just the fire of hell, but all of them. There are actions, for example, that we can perform in this life that protect us. One is the keeping of relations with our family, the doing of good deeds. Another one of the benefits that protects us from fishar kabar, the squeezing of the grave, which is one of the most difficult points of the grave that exists, is the aspect of where we do ghusl roze Jum'ah, the ghusl of the day of Friday. The day of Friday, one of the mustahab actions that actually this ghusl takes the place of wudu is known as ghusl Jum'ah. And it is one of the mustahabbat where even our ulama, for example, Sayyid Murtada Qazwini, who leads prayers in the haram of Imam Hussain in Karbala, hafidhahullah, may Allah protect him, himself says, he says, I may be sick, I may be in any condition, but I ensure I don't miss this ghusl because of the fear of the squeezing of the grave that even he possesses. That the benefit of that action is so great that we ensure that we don't miss this activity, and we ensure it's a part of our actions. So there are many of these activities that we have the responsibility to perform. And when we pray to Allah that, oh Allah, protect us from the fire of hell, it means that that's an important aspect, but all of these punishments are things we want the protection from Allah for. Inshallah, may Allah protect all of the mu'mineen. The subject of our discussion today is the fifth attribute. الَّذِينَ إِذَا أَنفَقُوا لَمْ يُسْرَفْ وَلَمْ يَقْتُرْ وَكَانَ بَيْنَ ذَلِكَ قَوَامًا. This fifth verse, this fifth attribute of the mu'mineen, Allah describes, and he says, they are those who, if they spend from their wealth, they are not found to be extravagant, nor are they found to be stingy, but they find a balance between these two attributes. One of the important things to note, when we're talking about these 12 characteristics, 12 to 13, we may even make some more, inshallah, if Allah gives us tawfiq, of Ibadur Rahman that are discussed in this surah, is to realize that these attributes are not uniquely related to your acts of worship, nor uniquely related to one aspect of your faith, but Allah has outlined attributes from all different aspects of a mu'min's personality in these attributes. Up until now, we've been talking about those attributes that apply to my internal character. Now we're talking about another attribute that deals with my environment and how I interact with people. And the attribute after this will turn to the concept of my aqeedah and explain the relationship that a mu'min possesses with his Lord. All of these attributes present different angles to explain that a mu'min is not uniquely one who is judged by his relationship with Allah, but also is judged by his relationship with society and environment. We have an obligation to say that when we say, I am a pious person, my piety is not only demonstrated in the way that I pray or fast. My piety is demonstrated in how I interact with people. When we talk about the way that Allah revealed our holy prophet Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, that certainly our prophet was on the best of character. إِنَّكَ عَلَى خُلُقٍ عَظِيمٍ. That the example of the prophet, it wasn't sufficient that the prophet prayed or fasted in a way unlike anybody else, but that even his dealing with society was exceptional amongst all the people. Which is why Allah now is addressing the attribute of how do you interact with society and what do you do with your wealth. And to guide this conversation, I had to make some notes to make sure that we stay with them. All right, Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Once you start talking about money, there's many things you can talk about. And everybody is interested once we start talking about money. So we have to make sure that the conversation stays on topic and stays focused. So I had to make some notes today. First and foremost, what's interesting about this discussion in the Quran where Allah is saying, وَإِذَا أَنفَقُوا لَمْ يُسْرَفْ وَلَمْ يَقْتُرْ, is the conversation to talk about that Allah is saying that when they spend from their money, they are neither extravagant nor are they poor. When they spend from themselves, they are neither extravagant nor are they stingy. Allah doesn't say maybe. Allah says when they spend from themselves. The explanation of this point is very clear in demonstrating that Allah is saying that I guarantee you'll have something to spend. I guarantee that you will have some wealth that you will be able to spend, that Allah is providing you with the wealth that you possess. That this isn't an attribute that you should be surprised about being able to possess. When we talk about the idea that Allah has created us, our sixth Imam gives the example. He says that your wealth is something that is with the most trustworthy individual, that you never have to worry about it, and it is guaranteed in a way that you cannot separate yourself from it. His point in saying is that Allah, who is the one who created us, guaranteed each of us the rizq and the sustenance for as long as we exist. It is his responsibility to provide this. So the Imam is explaining, he says, trust that whatever wealth you want or have in this life, you will certainly achieve that wealth, and there is nothing that can be taken away from you. No one can take your wealth from you. The example of this comes from Imam Ali ibn Abi Talib alayhi salam. One day in Kufa, Imam Ali is coming to the masjid to pray, and he has his horse with him. As he heads to the masjid, he sees a man coming. He says, hey, watch my horse for me, and hands him the horse and goes inside to pray. Imam Ali goes inside to pray. When he comes out, he sees that his horse is there, but the stirrups of the horse and the man are gone. And the man has stolen the stirrups off the horse and left. Now, normally, when you take the reins off of the horse is free, it runs away. But the horse of Imam Ali knows better, that there is nowhere better for it to be. So it stays right there. So Imam Ali takes his horse, he goes home. He says, Qambar, my stirrups were stolen. Here are 2 dirhams. Go to the market and buy me stirrups for my horse. Qambar says, okay. He was the servant of Imam Ali. He says, okay. He goes into the market. He goes to the shop to buy the stirrups. And he sees a stirrup there that looks exactly like the one Imam Ali had. So he says to the shopkeeper, how much? The shopkeeper says, I just bought this for someone for 2 dirham. You can have it if you want. Qambar says, here's 2 dirham my master gave me. Give me the stirrups. Qambar takes the stirrups and goes home and says, Ya Amir al-Mu'mineen, here's what I bought for you. Imam Ali says, huh? These are my stirrups. How did you find them? Qambar says, Wallah, Amir al-Mu'mineen, I went to the market, I went to the shopkeeper. The shopkeeper said someone just sold him these for 2 dirham. I paid him the 2 dirham and took them and I brought them back to you. Imam Ali says, how unfortunate is that man? His rizq was written. If he would have just waited for me, I would have given him these 2 dirhams from my own hands and they would have been halal for him. But he chose to go down a negative path and he stole it, and the same 2 dirham that he was going to have, either way, he earned from a haram source. The explanation is Allah has guaranteed your rizq. You're guaranteed what you will consume in this life is definitely yours. But the question is, do you have the patience to wait for Allah to give it to you? Or will you look for an inappropriate means to attain that same wealth? You can't have more than what Allah has promised. Your life lasts as long as Allah has written rizq for you, and when He finishes writing your rizq is the day and the moment that we leave this world. Allah has guaranteed for every creation that this will be given. So when Allah is saying, إِذَا أَنفَقُوا, that if they spend or when they spend, it's not a question of where will the money come from that they will spend. No, Allah has guaranteed for every creation that exists, there is an amount written for them that they are entitled to. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. The concept of spending from what Allah gives and exerting from what Allah gives is not unique to man. Everything Allah has created has the responsibility and the attribute that it spends from itself. If you take a look at the sun gives off its energy. If you take a look at the trees, they grow fruit upon them. If you look at the soil, it grows plants from amongst it. If you look at the animals, their skin, their meat, their benefits, there are many benefits. Everything Allah has created has something that comes as a benefit from it. Which is why when man becomes stingy and man develops the attribute that he doesn't want to spend, he becomes worse than the animals, because the animals give from themselves that benefits everyone. He becomes worse than the plants because the plants give from themselves that which is beneficial to others. He becomes worse than even the dirt on the ground because from even that comes something beneficial to all of society. It's important to know that to spend from ourselves and to spend in this nafaqah and to spend from our exertions and what we collect is one of the signs that Allah has created us and given us something that is beneficial. The same as everything else he has created. There's nothing that simply consumes without benefit except for man when he has greed. And therefore greed is not the attribute that we want to possess, which is why the idea of spending, the idea of giving from our wealth is something that Allah is describing and explaining to us the attributes of how it should be done. When Allah wants to explain the attributes of how to give, there are a number of ayat that he presents to us. One of these ayat is the verse that we're discussing right now in Surah Al-Furqan. وَالَّذِينَ إِذَا أَنفَقُوا لَمْ يُسْرَفْ وَلَمْ يَقْتُرْ. That they are those who when they spend, they are neither exorbitant in their spending, they are neither excessive nor are they stingy. There are other places as well where Allah gives this explanation. For example, one of the places where Allah gives the motivation to spend and that you should be spending is in Surah Al-Baqarah. At the end of Surah Al-Baqarah, starting from approximately verse number 240, 250, begins an entire description about how one should give charity and how one should help people. But before even Allah gets into that discussion, in verse 195, Allah says, وَأَنْفِقُوا فِي سَبِيلِ اللَّهِ وَلَا تَقْتُلُوا بِأَيْدِيَكُمْ إِلَى التَّهْلُكَةِ إِنَّ اللَّهَ يُحِبُّ الْمُحْسِنِينَ. Allah is giving an explanation. He says, spend from your wealth and do not cast yourselves into destruction by your own hands. This part of this verse, and don't cast yourselves into destruction by your own hands, is used in a number of different contexts as well too. One of the contexts where this verse applies is the discussion about, is self-harm acceptable or not? Can I hurt myself? And one of the verses that says that no, you can't hurt yourself is this idea, do not cast yourself into harm or destruction by your own hands. It's a very lengthy discussion that we'll get into at some other point in time, but it's not a very clear verse. It says that this verse can be used to prove that it is haram to kill yourself, but harm has many different degrees. Should I explain or should we move on? Explain it? Okay, sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Short of killing yourself, there are 3 levels of harm that you can cause yourself in general. One is physically cutting off a limb or cutting off something that is physically on your body and removing that aspect. I can, for example, I can remove a finger and I'm still alive. And the question comes, is this وَلَا تَلْقُوا أَنفُسَكُمْ بِأَيْدِيَكُمْ إِلَى التَّهْلُكَةِ? Does this count as someone casting themselves into destruction? Sin. Not likely. I'm still alive, but it's something that could be seen as a bad thing to do, but it's not considered killing myself. The second level of, for example, causing harm to oneself is removing one of my senses by my own hands. For example, I hit myself in the eye to the extent that my eye becomes blind. It's still there. I didn't remove the limb from my body, but I impacted myself in such a way that that sense no longer operates. For example, I listened to something so loud that it burst my eardrums and I can no longer hear. I've harmed my sense. I've come to a harm, but I haven't removed a physical limb and I haven't killed myself. The third of these actions that's a harm is even lesser than both of these, which is where, for example, I may strike myself, I may cause some harm to myself, but eventually that harm can be removed. The example of this, for example, is a man who lost his wealth. And when he lost his wealth, he sat there and struck himself in the head all day long. Hi, I lost my money, I lost my money, I lost my money. And the conclusion of him is that he lost his wealth and he lost his health. And what was the benefit that he gained from this action? But to say that any of these 3 can be haram on the basis of this ayah is incorrect. They may be actions that we say have no benefit. I did not gain a benefit by this action. But to say that it's haram is a difficult statement to make. Khususan where the attribute of, for example, causing myself that aspect of harm is reversible or it's not something that's proven. These all point to us in the direction that within this world, Allah has given us discretion over this body and we can utilize it, but we cannot go to the aspect of causing ourselves such irreparable harm that it ends our life. That Allah has forbidden clearly. These others from the intellectual proofs, we know that definitely removing limbs is not a good thing to do. There's no one who will tell you, yeah, it's a good idea. You have 2 feet, you don't need 2, take 1. Who says that? The intellect tells us this isn't something to do. The same way that our intellect tells us that causing harm to one of our senses is a bad thing to do, therefore we stay away from it. But this third category of, for example, where something may cause me harm for a short period of time, that it depends on what is the benefit that I'm gaining from it. And why am I performing this action? But to say that it is haram is not possible within the religion of Islam. That was our aside. Are we okay? Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Here Allah is describing that spend from your wealth. In Surah Baqarah, verse 19, spend from your wealth. That this not spending from your wealth is one of the ways that you cast yourself into destruction. I gave you these properties, these attributes, this rizq, to give to others from a share from amongst that you possess. The same way that Allah, in the same way that he describes in this verse of Surah Furqan, that make sure that you pick a path in the middle, Allah also describes in Surah Isra. He says, وَلَا تَجْعَلْ يَدَكَ مَغْلُولَةً إِلَىٰ عُنَقِكَ. Do not make your hand so tight and stingy that it is tied to your neck, that you spend nothing from your wealth. وَلَا تَبْسُطُهَا كُلُّ بَسْطٍ. And don't open your hands that you spend everything from you have, such that فَتَقْعُدْ مَلُومًا مَحْصُورًا. Don't spend everything that you have so that you can become blameworthy afterwards for having spent everything Allah has given you. Allah's instruction is always pick the middle path. Be conscientious that you give from what you have and you spend from what you have, but not to an excessive extent that it becomes so much that you cause yourself harm. Now, here's an example of how to understand this concept from our 6th Imam Ja'far ibn Muhammad as-Sadiq alayhi salam. Imam Sadiq explains, he says the explanation of this verse of don't spend so much and don't spend so little, he takes a handful of sand. He says one who is stingy with it, nothing comes out of his hand. The sand doesn't leave his hand, it stays in his hand. He says the one who spends too much, the Imam opens his hand and everything falls out. He says the example that Allah wants from us is he takes a fistful of sand and slowly releases some and some stays in his hand. He says this is the idea of what Allah wants from us. This is the natural order of things. The ideal example of what it is to share some and keep some is the example of the heart. The heart is a tool in our body that is designed to pump blood throughout the body. But if you notice, the heart keeps some of the blood within itself to protect itself. That the heart saves some blood for its own protection and for its own rejuvenation and pumps the rest of it out to the body. The same is true of all aspects. When we want to spend from our wealth in goodness, it doesn't mean spend everything such that tomorrow you have nothing to take care of yourself, that you become needy the next day. But don't hold so much in fear that nothing else will come that you don't spend anything from it. Allah has set the example of spending something instead of everything in many different ideas, including even the ahkam and the laws of khums and zakat. Khums and zakat is not that you give everything away, but rather that some portion of your wealth and income is what you give away. Very briefly, we'll explain this as well. Everybody's okay? We're good? Again, we're talking about money. There are many places we can go when we talk about money. I'm going to try to keep it brief. These two furu'ad-din, these two laws of Islamic laws that we have to fulfill, khums and zakat. I'll explain khums first and then we'll go to zakat. Khums, very, very briefly, very simply, the philosophy of khums is what? The philosophy of khums is this, is that Allah says, I will give you rizq. I will provide you sustenance. And Allah says, I will provide you sustenance for an entire year. At the end of that year, if I have given you extra than more than what you needed to survive for an entire year, I want you to give me 1/5 of that and spend it on those that are in need of help. This is the philosophy of khums. That after 1 year of sustenance, if I have excess, then 1/5 of that excess that I possess needs to go back to help other people. the idea of it is like an amanat. Allah gives you an amanat. He says, I gave you your sustenance and I gave you extra. Now I want to see, are you trustworthy with the sustenance that I gave you? Do you trust my amana? Will you give it back to me? If, and you'll find people who give their khums regularly, they'll swear by this, that when I pay my khums, I get more money. They'll swear by this. Why? Because look at the concept. Allah is saying, I gave you an amana. When I found you to be trustworthy with my amana, now I'm going to give you more. I'm going to trust you more. But if I find you not to be trustworthy with my amana, why should I give you extra then? Why should I open the doors of even giving you more because I didn't find you to be trustworthy? This is the concept of khums. The concept of zakat in the Quran, and this is an argument that's presented at times, that in the Quran, Allah mentions zakat many times and khums only once. Therefore, zakat should be a greater priority that we give in this life and more something that we should pay attention to. First off, the Quranic mention of zakat is not only the zakat of the Islamic law that has to be dispersed, but rather the kalima, the word of zakat, is also used for the term of charity. That when we talk about those who give zakat and perform salat, is the idea that this kalima of zakat is more appropriate to be used in those senses for those who give charity. Secondly, zakat is something that has been specified on only 9 things. And what's happened is this is where the difference has shown up between the different madhahib. Zakat within itself was established only on 9 things. 9 things and 9 things only. Those 9 things were gold and silver coins, cows, camels, sheep and goats, these 3 animals, and then raisins, dates, wheat and barley. 9 things. From the time of the Holy Prophet and forward. We know this for a fact, though these 9 things are not listed in the Quran. We have many narrations, including one by a person by the name of Muhammad ibn Tayyar, or Muhammad al-Tayyar, who comes to the 6th Imam and says, Ya Ibn Rasulullah, what do we have to give this zakat that is wajib upon us on? And the Imam lists these 9 things and he says, our Prophet forgave zakat on anything other than these 9 things. Muhammad al-Tayyar was a little stubborn. He was a little stubborn. Muhammad al-Tayyar says, Ya Ibn Rasulullah, but in our neighborhood, we have a grain that is outside of these 2, but we have a lot of it. Should we pay zakat on that? And the Imam says, what's that grain? He says, we have a lot of rice where I come from, but it's not wheat or barley. And Imam Sadiq replies to him, don't you listen? I just explained to you that the Prophet forgave it on anything other than these 9 things. That zakat is not mandatory on anything other than these 9 things. Now, for Madhab-e Ja'fari, these 9 things became the standard and nothing outside of this became wajib for zakat. Because the other door of khums was open to finance and fund the responsibilities of the mu'mineen. In the other madhahib that didn't respect and honor khums, they had a problem. As the world changed, a lot of people started doing business and doing things outside of these 9 things. They were no longer part of the way people earn income. So they had to figure out now, what do we do? There's no money coming into the government if these 9 things aren't what people are working on. If people live in the cities, they don't have gold coins or silver coins because they're not mining it. They don't have animals because they're living in the cities and they're not farming. So they changed the principle to say that, yes, there were 9 things at the time of the Prophet, but they were a measure of wealth. Now the measure of wealth has changed. So therefore, zakat should be due on the money that we possess. And in this way, they used qiyas. They used analogies to derive and expand and change the meaning of zakat. If there is a madhab that still stands with the way that Prophet described the concept of zakat, it is madhab Ja'fari that explains and says, the way the Prophet explained it that day until the day of judgment, these things will not change. Halalu Muhammadin halalun ila yawm al-qiyamah. Haramu Muhammadin haramun ila yawm al-qiyamah. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Now this explains to us that we have the obligation, how Allah has demanded that there are certain mandatory things that we have to spend on. But it's important to understand that these aren't the only places. That sadaqah, that charity, those good deeds that we do are also responsibility that we have to spend upon. Which is why There is even a verse that explains this in Surah Yasin, which is an interesting verse, that when we don't spend upon people in need, when we don't give from charity from our wealth, look at the conversation which is happening in the Quran. وَإِذَا قِيلَ لَهُمْ أَنْفِقُوا مِمَّا رَزَقَكُمُ اللَّهُ قَالَ الَّذِينَ كَفَرُوا لِلَّذِينَ آمَنُوا أَنْ نُطْعِمُوا مَنْ لَوْ يَشَاءَ اللَّهُ أَطْعَمَهُمْ إِنْ أَنْتُمْ إِلَّا فِي ضَلَالٍ مُبِينٍ. Allah explains, He says in the Quran, He says, if you were to say to the people, spend from what Allah has given you to help the poor people, the disbelievers reply to you, should we spend our money on those that if Allah wanted to give them food and money, He would have given Himself? Certainly you are in manifest error. Those who refuse to give charity, Allah is describing them as those who possess kufr. And imagine that the idea must be that Allah Himself provides directly, otherwise these people don't deserve our assistance. But in truth, Allah has affixed the wealth of the poor in the hands of the wealthy. He has affixed the obligations of those who are in need in the hands of the wealthy to see, is the greed that sits in our heart so great that we can't acknowledge that someone else has a share of our wealth? Or that we imagine, since I earned it, it's only for me, and we don't pay attention to others who are in need of this. The consequence of this, the opposite of this, is those people who, when they give, they imagine, I am doing the work of Allah. I'm doing the work of God when I help the poor. This too is a misconception. This too is wrong. Because in its fundamental, when we think about the attribute of Allah, when we say, I am doing the work of God, it implies that Allah Himself is incapable of providing for them a resource. Na'uzubillah, it comes to the point of kufr that Allah has an inability, that He needs me to do this action. The balance between these two is the one who understands that Allah affixing the wealth of the poor in my hands is not because Allah needs my help, but because there are certain good deeds that I cannot achieve. There are certain benefits in life I cannot achieve unless if I give sadaqah from my own hands. The purpose of this attribute of Allah affixing the wealth of the poor in the hands of the rich is because that person may have some sins that cannot be forgiven without this sadaqah. There may be some good deeds that this person cannot attain without this sadaqah. That the person himself needs to expiate his sins. He needs to remove the sins from his life, and the only way for him to do that is by the giving of charity. When we give charity, it's for our own benefit. It's for something that we need. Inshallah, tomorrow we'll continue this discussion around the idea of charity and understanding its concept and why it is something that I do for my own benefit and how it works. And we'll begin with a story tomorrow. But tonight, I want to move to a topic to explain something about the waqia of Karbala. In Karbala, there were maybe 72 companions, we say. 72. Hazrat Muslim ibn Aqil, when he was in the city of Kufa, he had 18,000 soldiers. Why did the mission of Muslim ibn Aqil fail and the Muslim mission of Imam al-Hussain succeed? It succeeded in such a way that when someone came to Umar Sa'd Mal'un after the event of Karbala and said to him, "Oh Mal'un, oh accursed, there were 72. Was there no way you had an army of thousands?" Some narrations, conservative estimates say 12,000, and the traditional estimates say 30,000 soldiers stood against Imam Hussain. And they came to Umar Sa'd and said, "Oh Mal'un, oh accursed, so many soldiers, you couldn't control 72 men?" And Umar Sa'd replies, he says, "Close your mouth. May Allah put stones in your mouth to close your mouth. You don't understand. Though they were thirsty for 3 days, they were lions in such a way that if we didn't kill them, they would have destroyed the entire army." What was the difference between these two events? That Muslim ibn Aqil is left alone in Kufa. And Imam al-Hussain, that children come begging for his permission to fight for him. That children were the killers of champions. The biggest difference is how Ubaydullah structured his attack against Muslim ibn Aqil. When Muslim ibn Aqil gathered the army in front of the qasr, in front of the palace of Ubaydullah, Ubaydullah didn't send, he had only a few soldiers with him. He didn't send them out to face Muslim. He took them, he says, I want each of you to take a banner and go out to each of the mahalla, each of the neighborhoods in the city. And I want you to raise this flag. And I want you to call out that Yazid ibn Muawiyah is sending, the Khalifa is sending an army so large that it will destroy anyone who stands against him. But anyone who takes security under this flag, his wealth, his family, his property will be protected. The soldier said, but there's no men in the neighborhoods. They're all in front of your palace. But Allah said, go do what I'm telling you to. And each of these men took a flag from the governor, stood in the neighborhood and started calling out, anyone who takes the protection under this flag and returns to their home now, Yazid will protect their blood, will protect their wealth, will protect their families. And anyone who doesn't seek the protection of this flag, his blood will be spilled, his children will be imprisoned, his wealth will be taken, everything will be lost from him. But there were no men there. The women heard this call. And the women of Kufa became scared. And one by one, they went to the palace of Ubaidullah and they said to their men, come home. They said to their fathers, their brothers, their sons, come home. They said, we have to help Muslim. We have to stand up against Yazid. And first they said, Muslim has 18,000 soldiers. He doesn't need you. What's going to happen to us if you die? Who's going to take care of us? Come home. The man said, yeah, he does have 18,000 soldiers. And they started to leave. And eventually the argument changed. The Muslim only has 6,000 soldiers. Muslim only has 5,000 soldiers. Why are you killing yourself? You're going to die. There's no way you can win. Until eventually that by the end of Salat al-Isha, not one man was ready to stand with Hazrat Muslim ibn Aqil. Verses in Karbala, the example comes of a person by the name of Wahab al-Kalbi. Wahab al-Kalbi was a Christian, not even a Muslim. But when he saw the situation happening in Karbala, he was with his wife, who was a new wife, and his mother. And his mother says, go find out what's going on. And Wahab al-Kalbi comes to Imam al-Hussain, listens to the story, comes back, and says to his mother, Wallah, I swear, I think this is a very pious man and he's in a very difficult situation. What do you think we should do? Should we help him? Wahab al-Kalbi's wife says, no, let's go home. This isn't our fight. We're not even part of their religion. Let's get out of here. And Wahab al-Kalbi's mother says, no, don't listen to her. Fight for him. Support him. Wahab al-Kalbi listened to his mother and went and stayed on the day of Ashura. He presented himself with the army of Imam Hussain. When one of the first champions of Umar Asad came out, they called out for one-on-one combat. And Wahab al-Kalbi offered himself. He says, I'll go fight. Imam Hussain says, you're a good match, go fight. Wahab al-Kalbi fights for Imam al-Hussain. And he wins. And he keeps fighting until eventually one point in time in the middle of the battle, his fingers become cut off. So he finishes the enemy and he comes back with the wound. When he comes back towards the tents, this is a very famous statement. The wife of Wahab comes running out and she says, why did you come back to me alive? Why didn't you go kill yourself? Wahab says, be patient, woman. I've only come to wrap my wound so I can return to the battlefield. And then he says, why did I see your condition change? Before you weren't even willing for us to fight in this battle, but now you're saying, why did I come back alive? She says, that was my mistake before I knew how ghareeb this Hussein was. Once I saw his condition, I cannot stand that the son of Zahra should be left alone in the field of Karbala. These women were the supporters of Abu Abdullah in the way that they prepared their children, they prepared their brothers, they prepared their fathers, their husbands to go out and fight for Imam Hussein without fear. Not one said, what will happen to me after you go? Zuhair ibn Qayn famously, when he wants to go for the fighting of Imam al-Hussein, he says to his wife, I divorce you. You go on your way, I'm going with Abu Abdullah. She says, oh Zuhair, now that you go to victory, you leave me alone without you. These were the women. But the amazing thing was what made them strong was any time Abu Abdullah would bring a shaheed back, before the woman could come see her Shaheed, come see her brother, her son, her father, her husband. The one who would be sitting over them would be Sayyidah Zainab, congratulating her and saying, be patient, don't worry. My mother Zahra will reward you for your sacrifice. You've lost a great benefit, but don't worry. My mother will be with you. Sayyidah Zainab was the first one who would be by the side of any woman whose family was Shaheed. But there was one exception. As these women were preparing their families and their sacrifices on the night of Ashura, famously Sayyidah Zahra was sitting in her tent with two boys and her two sons, Awn and Muhammad. These two boys, it said, the sons of Abdullah ibn Ja'far, the son of Ja'far al-Tayyar, the grandsons of Ja'far al-Tayyar, the great champion in the history of Islam. It said that when Sayyidah Zainab planned to leave the city of Medina, her husband came to her as she left. One narration says, as she left Medina, he came. And she said to him, oh Abdullah, when I married you, I set a condition that I have never been without my brother Hussain. The relationship with Sayyidah Zainab and Imam Hussain was such that they described that when Sayyidah Zainab was an infant and she would cry, the only thing that would make her stop crying as an infant was when Imam Hussain would hold her. That she would look at Imam Hussain and she would stop crying. She says, oh Abdullah, I've never been without my brother. I set the condition that when he leaves, I go with him. Abdullah says, oh Zainab, I see that your brother is going to difficulty. I want you to take these two boys from us. One from me and one from you. If you find your brother in difficulty, sacrifice one from yourself and one from me so that we can be a part of the sacrifice of Aba Abdullah. The night of Ashura, Sayyidah Zainab is sitting with her boys and reminding them, she says, tomorrow is a day of great difficulty on your uncle. You have been prepared and sent as a sacrifice on behalf of your father and I. Do not embarrass us tomorrow that someone should precede you in going to present their sacrifice for your uncle. Be sure that you are amongst the first. Be sure that you represent your grandfather Ja'far al-Tayyar, one of the greatest warriors in the history of Islam. Don't forget whose grandsons you are. Ensure that your bravery, from one side you are the grandsons of Ja'far, from the other side you are the grandsons of Ali ibn Abi Talib. You must be amongst the foremost of the warriors. And these children are swearing, oh mother, we promise you we will honor you. You will not be disappointed with our sacrifice. The day of Ashura comes. The day of Ashura comes, these boys come forward, they say, Ammu, give us permission. Uncle, give us permission to go fight. Aba Abdullah says, be patient, my boys. You are so young. The enemy is so harsh. You have been thirsty for 3 days. I can't send you. How can I send you? They say, oh uncle, our mother will not be pleased with us. The companions become spent, the boys come again. They say, give us permission. Eventually, Imam al-Hussein gives permission to these two boys. Now understand something, the Banu Hashim are under the authority of Qamar Bani Hashim and under the flag of Abbas. Abbas is the one who has trained all of these children to be warriors. He has trained them himself the way he was trained. Remember in Siffin, Abbas is only 13 years old and the army runs in fear of him at 13. Abul Fadl has prepared these boys to go and to fight. And they go and they present together and they fight in such a way that it said that any enemy who would come against them would fall until eventually they wound up encircling the children and attacking them from all sides. Have you imagined what happened to the heart of that uncle who trained these boys? Oh Mal'ud, my children are thirsty for 3 days. You cannot stand against them in one-to-one combat, so you come and you encircle them. One boy falls, the other one falls. Abul Fadl runs from one side, Imam Hussein runs from the other. They reach the two children who have died in the battlefield. They collect the two sons and bring them to the tents the way they have brought every shaheed. But unlike every shaheed, when these two boys come, there is no Zainab. Abu Abdullah calls, where is my sister? Let her bid farewell to her children. Zainab would not come see her boys. Imam al-Hussein says, come Zainab, see them one last time. Say that Zainab does not cry. How can she give strength to others when she cries? She sits between them and says, Allah yatakabbal minna. Allah accept our sacrifice. Sayyidah Zainab does not cry in Karbala. When they leave the field of Karbala, every mother cries at the beheaded body. Zainab does not cry over her sons. In Sham, when the heads are returned, every mother collects the heads. 2 heads come. They say, were these orphans? They reply, Hasha lillah, their mother Zainab is here. But Zainab weeps for Hussein, does not weep for Aun and Muhammad until she returns to Medina. Zainab returns to an empty house. There is no sound of children. Zainab sits between the 2 beds of her sons. Hi, my children. Where has your mother left you in the wilderness? Why are you not here with me? I do not hear your crying or sounds in our house anymore. ألا لعنة الله على القوم الظالمين وسيعلم الذين ظلموا أي منقلب ينقلبون. With tears in our eyes, ندعوك